So awesome. I think that everyone can hear us. Thanks to the AVEX team for your support and getting us all situated. Thank you all for your patience. I think we are all ready to go. It seems that we are now in a typical Zoom environment. Hopefully everyone is familiar with the platform. I wanted to encourage you to use the I see most people using the question and answer module, which is fine. We certainly can see it. But for any person who is looking to utilize the chat, that feature is open as well. I see that also the sound is a bit low. I'm not sure if that's the case for everyone. Michelle, how is your hearing of me?
I can hear you very well.
Okay, and for you as well. So for anyone that may be having any volume issues, make sure perhaps that your speakers are turned up to the appropriate levels. And so thank you, and thank you. We're gonna get started here. I'm just trying to bring up a few of our notes. So what we thought we'd do today during this business meeting is certainly to engage with you as a community, as members of our HBCU-UP family. We have a number of topics that we have identified that we at least wanted to provide you in the forms of updates or kind of just sharing with you various opportunities that may come up. But I will say that what we'd really like to do is hear from our PI community with regard to any challenges you may be experiencing. Certainly we heard in the introductions that from our Assistant Director, Karen, everyone certainly has been impacted by COVID-19. I wanted to share that we'll have another opportunity in the second day to specifically talk about strategies for mitigating for mitigating the impacts of COVID-19. But beyond that, I want you to be thinking about what are other challenges that you may be experiencing that we should be aware of. And given that, certainly I know that I'm the newest to the team, but both Emmanuel and Michelle have been with the agency for about a year, I will presume, or almost two in some cases, that we're still relatively new. Certainly when you compare our experience to that of Claudia and her departure, there's so much for us to learn. And we all thought, Michelle and I in particular, that hearing from you regarding the future of the program would be one way to give us a launch point to certainly discuss where we go from here. And so with that, I wanted to begin by identifying that first topic is just certainly to reinforce that for the HBCU-UP program, we do have 3 program officers, certainly Michelle and I, but also Emmanuel Waddell, who you saw at the top of the open plenary session. All 3 of us contribute and are program officers over all of the projects or many of the projects within the program. They're distributed amongst us. And so you very well will hear from one of us regarding your specific projects or proposals and the processing therein. But we also wanted to make an announcement. If you have not been actively pursuing USA Jobs, we wanted to bring to your attention that there is a new opportunity within the HBCU-UP program. I'll place it in the chat for everyone, a link. If you or anyone that you may be aware of has an interest in serving the public as a member of the National Science Foundation community, specifically for HBCU-UP. I've provided a link, but I also wanted to share within the HRD division, there are opportunities not only in HBCU-UP, but also the HSI program, as well as LSAMP. And so via USA Jobs, if you type in science education, I think it's science education director, the first few job announcements that'll come up will be those that are certainly listed. And so we are excited about opportunities to welcome new persons to the team. And so if you have an interest or know someone that may, feel free to distribute that link accordingly. Next, in terms of an update, we wanted to bring to your attention, I see there are a couple hands up before I transition. I'm not sure if the raised hand feature, well, that's me, will allow persons to speak at this moment. Do you know, Michelle?
I am not sure.
If we'll be able to hear.
And if you continue, I can go ahead and contact Iris
Okay.
and see if I can find out.
Sure. As soon as we are able to confirm whether or not we can hear you, we will do so. It looks like maybe we can't, but certainly if you have any questions or comments, both Michelle and I will be navigating the chat bar as well as the question and answer to certainly try to address any questions that you may have. Thank you, Iris, for that confirmation. And so the next topic that we wanted to offer as part of this business meeting was the important documents. So I will continue to add into the chat window. We do have an updated solicitation. And so if you are, there are slight modifications to the solicitation. This was actually released last year, last summer, I believe. And so it is very much consistent with the previous versions. The most notable difference is there was a track, HBCU Excellence in Research, that was initially part of the HBCU-UP program. That track is no longer within the program. It's certainly still an active program for receiving proposals, but it is not solely supported by the program. It is now run through OIA. Michelle, I'm starting to get acclimated to the acronyms.
Office of Integrative Activities.
Office of Integrative Activities. So yeah, so it's more across agency in its support. And so it's just not listed in the solicitation as well. I mean, specifically through the HBCU-UP program. So that's one significant modification. And we also wanted to share that there is a new PAPG. Certainly the PAPG is the kind of the document that governs how awards are certainly considered in the proposal stage, but also how they're administered. And many of the questions that we receive with regard to management of awards, there's certainly much of it is addressed in the PAPG. And so we please want to continue to defer you to those two documents as they've been recently updated, but certainly we should make sure that we're reviewing the most current versions of those documents. Next, we wanted to also share with you a number of new opportunities where that we've recently been aware of. There's a lot of activity, certainly, in the agency, but there's two in particular that we wanted to highlight for this particular audience. One is entitled Mid-Career Advancement. I'm going to place that website in the chat. And the other is called BP Innovate. And I'll place that link here for you as well. First, with regard to mid-career advancement, this is an initiative that really targets the faculty member who is mid-career level. It is an initiative where at times, particularly at HBCUs, where you may have a faculty member that's certainly talented, they've come in, they've been engaged in research, and then there's a significant amount of service request, if you will, of said faculty member, and that service may in fact at times take them away from the broad scale productivity that they would typically have in their research program. And then after that, time and investment and service, that faculty member may want to re-engage and regain momentum, if you will, with regard to their research endeavors. And so that mid-career advancement as a funding mechanism to specifically support persons who may fall, for example, in that category. There's a number of other kind of qualifiers, if you will, to identify the persons that would be very appropriate for that. I will say that our team member, Emmanuel Waddell, is the primary contact person for that funding announcement. And so if there's an interest in particular in the mid-career advancement, Emmanuel will be the primary contact for you. So if you were to have an interest or a question, he would be able to assist. BP Innovate, while I've listed it there, I wanted to make certain that we've actually been informed that the deadline for receiving that particular or submitting that proposal is next Tuesday. So it's not a lot of time to kind of generate new ideas, if you will, but we certainly thought it was important to share it with you all. There very well may be, in fact, a number of you who have ideas with regard to broadening participation, particularly for those who may be interested in entrepreneurial endeavors. That particular announcement is also I guess, across the agency, if you will, and cross-cutting in terms of the disciplines, in terms of how it's supported. And so while the deadline is upon us very soon, we wanted you, A, to be aware, but B, understand that both for BP Innovate and Mid-Career Advancement, they specifically identify faculty from HBCUs as prime candidates for consideration of these given funding mechanisms. And so we want to make sure that we're always sharing those opportunities that are beyond the program. And so that is there for you. Okay, and so that actually concludes, Michelle, much of the updates that we wanted to provide our audience. And I know we initially, for planning purposes for our participants, discussed a break, but given our technical challenges, we want to certainly be mindful of your time. Michelle, if there's anything that I didn't forget, I wanted to then transition to the open discussion pieces of learning of any or making us aware of any challenges that our PIs may be experiencing, and then certainly future direction recommendations that we might be able to consider.
Thanks so much, Carlita. There were some questions that did come into the chat that we might be able to address before moving onward. Um, so one of them was regarding the sessions and if they would be available after the conference. I know that the meetings are being recorded, and I believe that they will be available, but I need to confirm that in order to give you a direct answer. The next question is, if you are at an HBCU and you wish to submit an NSF Career Award, do you have to go through the HBCU-UP or apply directly to the directorate where your research will fit? And the latter is the case. You would submit your application directly to the directorate where your research will fit. At times, we do get career awards that come through HBCU-UP, but typically they tend to fall under the category of STEM education research or more in line with broadening participation activity. So I have an answer from our colleague, Dr. Wagstaff. She says, we are recording plenaries and PI videos. Um, and she said, yes, the business meetings are being recorded. So the information will be available after the meeting. With regard to any other matters that I thought that we ought to address, please there's some things that I would love for you to pay attention to as you read the new PAPG. The PAPG um, indicates there's some changes that have been, well, they introduced them back in, I believe, June 5th of 2020 with a hard start of October 5th, 2020. What are those things? The biographical sketch and current and pending supports. Those are items that we know are mandatory for all of our applications. And I've seen this in my role as in at my institution in reviewing certain grants, that many times our PIs will put these information using old templates. Understand that NSF is going to a more automated approach of handling applications. And so if you are inclined to use old templates or try to utilize, for example, a template that may work for another agency, for instance, NIH, understand that that could give you an automatic return without review. And there would be nothing that any of us at HBCU could do about it. So I encourage you to look at the PAPG very in detail, get accustomed to this new framework for inputting information. And my understanding is that as you input this information, it is something that can be updated, not necessarily. So it's something that you don't have to do over and over again. You can update it once you've already put your information in, depending on how you do it. So pay attention to these things because in the past, the POs could say, just send it to me via an email. And HBCU-UP was known for assisting our PIs in that way. We are now in a situation where the buck stops with you. So please don't let your wonderful ideas be rejected because of simple items that we're missing with the new requirements that are in the PAPG. Note, I see Rupak has put in BioSketch and as I mentioned, current and pending support. And it's very detailed. So things that we did not think of as current and pending support, there are ways to explore what you have. And if you exclude that, you might get a little email saying you did not, or we might get the email, you did not include this thing or that thing, and therefore your application is questionable. Please do not let that happen to you. Those were the things I could think of, Carlita. And so if And so, I yield to you.
Thank you. I too, as you were speaking, Michelle, started to go through some of the questions. And there's a question about moving institutions, specifically as it pertains to the EIR. And I will say that typically it is a challenge to move grants between institutions. There is a significant amount of coordination that has to happen in order for that to occur. This attendee is anonymous, so I'm not sure which institution, but given that the HBCU-UP EIR program is intended to extend the research capacity of HBCUs, certainly moving to another HBCU may be feasible, but moving beyond the HBCU community may introduce a bit more challenges therein. So,
No, may I interrupt? It's not may, it's a definite.
okay.
These are federally appropriated funds.
Mhm.
So, and again, no judgment. There's some people who want to get their start at an HBCU and transition outside of that community. If you get funds that are relegated, specifically appropriated to HBCUs, know that you must plan to leave the money there if you plan to go outside of an HBCU. You're bringing a whole bunch of scrutiny to yourself and to your institution if you try to make that transition with those funds.
Thank you, Michelle. And for the audience here, I just wanted to reiterate that I certainly appreciate your patience as I also grow in my understanding of different policies as it pertains to the management of the various programs. I didn't mention at the outset, but I started in November. So we're, just at almost 3 months. And there's a huge learning curve, but I'm excited. And so I did see a question, not so much in the Q&A, but also in the chat from Vernon Ruffin. And the question is essentially, if you received a grant where you were conducting research on campus, but are having some difficulty, should it be continued at a different site or through a collaboration? My initial gut says that first and foremost, I think it's important that you contact your program officer to discuss what those challenges are and and how perhaps to work through what they may be depending upon the nature of the challenge. I will say we've heard from a number of PIs, particularly during this COVID environment where some productivity has been limited, especially if an institution closes or they don't have, are not permitting persons on campus to do that research. Certainly just communicate to your program officer and they can work through a strategy with you. However, if there is a collaborator that's been identified as part of the work, I would say, Michelle, that, working with that collaborator, if that's feasible for the PI, I think would certainly be appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in terms of impacting the next grant for that institution, I'm not sure that I fully understand the question, other than being able to say that, depending upon the type of grant, right? So there's a number of awards that one may have. And so if it is, all of them are received by their ability to fulfill the objectives as was outlined in the proposal. And so I think that's really the basis for which any other consideration would be received. I didn't know how it would affect the institution.
Could you go back to the question? Because I think I might be looking at the wrong question that you're
It's
addressing.
specifically in the chat, and it says,
Okay.
how does this impact I guess it was a continuation from the first part. How does this
Okay.
impact the next grant you go for at that institution?
So if you're talking about the same institution, meaning the HBCU that you're in,
I assume.
okay. Um, it's, of course, if you've shown success with any award, any NSF award, this is something that we ask you to report on, success or no success, in a second application. Ideally, you want to be able to list successes, and something else that the new PAPG says is that we ask you when you report, specifically to report on intellectual merit and broader impact. So it's now not just telling us, oh, we got the grant and yeah, we spent the money and it ended, blah, blah, blah. They ask for specific information. What do you consider to be successes in these different fields? And so you want to have those answers in order to say, look, I did good by the funds you've given me, and therefore I promise I'm going to continue to do well with some more funds if you would trust me with it. Haven't I proven myself with these results? That's what you want to demonstrate. And I've said this in a number of venues, and I'll say it to you. Many times our institutions are so enthusiastic about gaining the research dollars that sometimes we forget we have to execute, and not just execute, but execute with excellence. While we get to compete among ourselves for these reserved funds, we still have a certain level of scrutiny that we have to make sure that we do well, so that we can say, listen, you've heard that we were great. Now this is our time to show you. Look what we've done with these funds, which, by the way, is a very small portion compared to the rest of the directorates in of NSF. So we've done it before. We've done excellently before with small funds. Please, please, please do not allow this to be an opportunity to sit on one's laurels and not continue the work. Did you want me to address anything else, Carlita?
No, I was actually still going through some
Okay.
of the other questions. I can stop. I probably should mute so everyone doesn't hear me type. I
No,
apologize for
it's okay.
that. There's just going through the questions. Dawn wanted to say tomorrow during day 2, there's another series of breakout sessions where we have a new PI session. We'll start to talk specifically to our new PIs about program reports, annual reports, when they're due, things like that. And so feel free to bring that question to that meeting, and we'll get into a little more detail about topics that are more pertinent to the new PI community.
Awesome.
Yeah. Question about supplements. I will say that the federal appropriations specifically for the agency have not been confirmed. And so to outright indicate the availability of funds specifically for supplements would be difficult to do. That said, I recommend, and Michelle can provide a different perspective for those who want to submit consideration for a supplement, they should feel free to do so, and then they'll be reviewed as they come in.
Yes, exactly. Of course, for those of you who are veterans at this, we ask that you request your supplement in a timely fashion. And some of you would also consider doing things like no-cost extensions. So make sure you speak to us relatively early in the game, i.e. maybe 3 to 4 months out, right? Before the end of your annual year, right? Your year of funding, so that we can better advise you when is the best time to make your requests.
Okay. And just as a follow-up, it seems another person may have had a similar experience as Vernon Ruffin. And the response is, just how to reach out or what's the best mechanism. Certainly, email would be a great way to just confirm availability, but a program officer may say, you know what, let's just have a conversation about it. And then based on their schedules, you can kind of coordinate a more in-depth conversation about what may be going on as necessary. So again, just reach out to your program officer and share what those challenges are.
Beautiful. Could we go back to this person? I guess it's an anonymous attendee. The question says, can you please cover the expectation in the project description requirements, broader impact statement versus the same statement in the project summary for implementation proposals? Did you want to take that? Do you want me to take that?
Sure, I didn't see it, but
Okay, sure.
yeah, so there are two places in which you would, at least two places, in which you would communicate the potential broader impacts as informed by your given proposal. Yes, one in the summary. The summary should be, in short, three parts: a summary of a brief description of the proposal at large, and then explicitly stating two of the merit review criteria, one intellectual merit and one broader impacts. But specifically in the program description, you would have more opportunity to explain the full extent of what the broader impacts is specifically for this question. And so it's imperative not to um, uh, uh, not to do both, or you should do both. Let me say it that way. It's imperative that you do both. The summary page is, a limited amount of text in which you may not be able to fully capture the full extent with regard to the activities associated with the broader impacts or what it is that you might be anticipating as a potential outcome. And so it's the project description where you have more of an opportunity to provide that context based on the nature of the proposal.
With regard to the next question, I guess by the same person, it says, I received an RIA. Am I still eligible for a career? And the short answer is yes. Of course, with the guidelines regarding career applicants. So it depends on where you are in your career. And as long as you meet that criteria, yes, you are eligible. Carlita?
Sure, I'm just following. I've caught up to where you are now, I think.
Okay.
Could you address the no cost extension, I think is the next question. So no cost extensions are typically considered for those proposals where you're nearing the end of the funding period and have presumably experienced some challenges that your project could benefit from a bit more time. As Michelle said, typically 3 to 4 months before the expiration date or the ending date, if you will, of the project is ideal. And so to do that, I wanted to first state that you need to do that with the assistance of your sponsored programs office via research.gov to make the request. The first request for no cost extension is typically approved. Just in doing so and filling out the form, you'll provide the justification, but typically that's approved. But the second or any thereafter has to be reviewed in detail by the program officer, and at times it might even include a discussion with the Grants and Agreements Office, depending upon when the award was actually made. So the opportune time is usually in that window of the 3 to 4 months before it's scheduled to expire. And typically those awards may have resources that haven't been expended that are set to expire by the end of the funding period. Okay.
So this question says, with NSF contact new PIs with regard to program reports and due dates. And normally you get an email that says report due now, but understand that it was really due before then. so, so when you look at your annual date, your year to year funding time, right? And I'm sorry, I'm messing up my words. You want to start submitting your reports about 3 months before then. So for most of our projects, they your funding period starts maybe around October. We want to have your reports in by June, the absolute latest July, but we really need them by June because that helps us to plan our next set of activities. And when I say next set of activities, how do we spend our money? So we need you to be very diligent about annual reports. Also, I thank you for asking that question because it prompts something that many of us don't necessarily think about. If you have a co-PI on your award, and that person, we're not going to blame you. Let's say that person has an outstanding report on another award that probably has nothing to do with you. It will hinder you from moving forward with any request that you wish to make moving forward. So let's say there was an increment that needs to be released to you. It will not come until that other person has taken care of their outstanding report. If you wish to apply for another award, nope, you have a co-PI that, and sometimes it takes some digging to find who it is that has something outstanding. So you want to make sure that you do a good job of turning in your annual reports in the time that I've mentioned so that you won't be the culpable person for hindering someone else's NSF progress.
Awesome. I'm going to switch to the chat and allow you to stay in the question and answer. There's a few questions that came via the chat.
Okay.
The first is about being impacted by transitioning to virtual, and will the grant have an extension? That feeds into that conversation about the no cost extension. Without knowing where you are within the timeline of your grant, certainly if this is the last year, right, and the deadline is approaching, the no cost extension may very well be something that's appropriate for this particular project. But again, that is something that has to be initiated by the PI and with the support of the sponsor program office. That is not something that will be granted without an action, if you will, from the PI and the sponsor programs office. Next is the EIR and how important is the education part. I will say for all proposals that come for review, regardless of the program, both merit review criteria should be addressed. Intellectual merit and broader impacts. I assume when you say education, you're referring to broader impacts, in which education is an example of how broader impacts can be presumably included, but it is not required. But all proposals need to address both merit review criteria, even in the EIR. And then where do we find the annual report forms? So in research.gov, when you go to submit the annual report, it is an all electronic interface. So there's not a separate form that you would need to download and then upload after completing it. Once you log on to research.gov to submit the annual report, there are specific prompts that will identify various questions. Typically, it starts with what are the maybe, what had you accomplished over, say, given period of time. It goes through all of the persons that may have contributed to the project. There's about 5 pages, if you will, with or 5 different tabs, if you will, which represent different pages that have a series of questions. And so it is at research.gov where you will find that information. Michelle, is that also outlined in the PAPG as well?
There's information in the PAPG regarding that, but it does give you guidance when you go into research.gov. The old platform was Fastlane, but now all our reporting is done in research.gov. And while we're on that, know that the NSF broadly is moving to a complete research.gov management system for grants. Right now, there are certain things that are being worked out as this platform is being rolled out, but most of the agency uses it for submissions, for reporting, for everything. We are still doing our submissions via Fastlane, but to your point, reporting via research.gov. So just go into the system and if you have questions, we'll do our best, of course, to aid you. And something else I want to point out, the networking session tomorrow is an opportunity for you to exchange information with with each other. And so should there be opportunity to have some of these discussions, please, please, please utilize them. Don't say, oh, I don't have to go to that. There's some really cool stuff that we're going to be talking about, and they'll be addressing some of the questions that I'm seeing here. For example, how do I continue during this new normal?
Yeah, some persons have really made significant gains in making said adjustments. And so we're looking forward to hearing from them and having them share in that broader audience. And so that just gets to many of the, or couple questions. One just came in the chat and one was already in the Q&A, just about the best way to go about loss of productivity. We can't emphasize enough how, depending upon where you are, the no cost extension might be something to consider. Otherwise, it's a matter of explaining the challenges they're in that annual report, and working through what might be mechanisms to adjust if necessary to deliver on some of the objectives of the award. And so I think Dr. Hatley, I wish we could see you all. This is
I know.
this is someone that I recently met, and so I don't know, it makes me smile. I think that we have the same idea of supplemental funding. When you said supplement just means more, I think we have a similar understanding on that. And so submitting those applications for supplemental awards certainly should be done. And then again, as we know more about what our budgetary capacity is, we'll be making awards accordingly.
With regard to supplemental funds, of course, remember you have to make an argument for how this will enhance the scope of your project and possibly was not discussed in the earlier stages, right? When you submitted the formal grant. So I can say in the old days, and don't look at me too hard because I will claim to be young. And so in the old days, for example, it was not common for PIs through HBCU-UP to ask for a postdoc, or at PUIs, it was almost taboo, right? And maybe that was through the underground conversation. But as many of us do in our institutions, we moved up quickly. I moved up quickly to an administrative role, and I was not giving away my grant. And so then I talked to my PO, and he said, you can make an argument for a postdoc. And so I requested supplemental funds for a postdoc back then. So there are other things that will come up because of this environment that we're in. To your point, I think is Dr. Hatley, you may wish to enhance your virtual infrastructure. a convincing argument with the appropriate quotes and again emphasizing the intent to stay within the scope or even broaden the scope in a way that's admirable, um, is the way to go about requesting those supplemental funds.
There are actually two questions, Michelle, that I would
Mhm.
be learning from you
Tell
with
me.
regard to the answer. There's a question about submitting financial reports.
Oh.
Um, I I didn't have that experience as a PI, so I'm not
Okay.
sure when that might be necessary. And so, if you could speak to that, and then the second question is regarding supplemental funds for catalysts,
Okay.
whether or not that's possible.
So, financial reports. Your university is supposed to have a business arm. They're the ones that take care of the financial component of your grant. Now, I am not naive. I've been at two different HBCUs, and as a PI, I would tell you if you just spend your money and assume that somebody else is taking care of your checkbook, you are sadly mistaken. So you need to keep your own records of everything that you've spent. And then you also, fortunately, unfortunately, have to be your own program manager to check in with the financial arm of your institution to make sure that all the bills have been paid. Some of us who have been veterans have heard of and experienced situations where you said, I know I spent this, I know I spent that. And then you get what one of my friends calls a nice, nasty note from NSF saying, you haven't spent your money. What's the problem? That's because invoices aren't being sent to NSF to reimburse the institution for the funds that you've spent from your grant. And so you have to do due diligence. Now, if you have a great operating system, kudos to you. But chances are, whether you have it or not, I strongly encourage you know what's going on with your money. Let me say it like that. And I agree with you, Camille, Dr. McHale, that it's the university's money, but you are the person that's representing the university with regard to administering the activities pertaining to that particular project. So, with regard to the report, the institution prepares that report and submits it to the agency, typically at certain points of the grant, right? And certainly by the end of the award. That is not something that the PI does. That's the institution that does that. The second part of that question, remind me.
Oh, it was just a separate second question of whether
Okay.
or not supplemental funding was available for catalysts.
For Catalyst Awards, um, you'd have to have a seriously convincing argument to 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 say let's do a supplement. But that's a conversation we can have offline. You know, if you don't ask, you never know. I can't just give a generic response, nor can Carlita give a generic response and say, oh yeah, everybody that has a catalyst, come and make your requests known. Of course, there are a number of factors that come into play. And so I would strongly suggest that if you believe you're in need of supplemental funding, let's have an offline conversation outside of this meeting.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
I'm just going through the question and answer. Is a question about um, if the university hasn't released the resources for spending and you're coming upon the end of your grant, does that fall under no cost extension? That certainly would present a rationale for why those resources haven't been expended. So,
Yeah, but then you found yourself in that tricky spot, right?
yeah.
So again, so here is a little political advice, and there's more seasoned people here a number of more seasoned people online who can maybe give you their take on it. But here's the bottom line. Nobody wants to say my university didn't handle their business, right? And we've gotten emails, and let me just put this little PSA out there. We've gotten emails. The people in our office, they don't know what they're doing. And read a man, I mean, I understand. Keep that kind of conversation um, offline at the coffee shop, right? Don't put that in an email, whether you feel it's true or not. If you have to make, and this is Michelle talking, oh Lord, we're being recorded, so I have to be very careful. So Carlita knows me by now. When you make an argument for extension, no cost extension, you are proposing to do some activity that needs more time. I would say I'm going to confine my arguments to that line of thinking. Do not blame your institution. Fuss at them in the back, but publicly before the government, you want to say, I need time to do XYZ. That's why you ask for a no cost. No cost meaning I'm not asking you for more money. I'm asking you for an extension, right? The term no cost
More
extension
time.
for
Yeah.
more time to do the activities that need to be done in order for this project to be as excellent as we all know it's supposed to be. I've given you some language for your argument. You use it as you will.
Great job. And yes, Dr. McHale, not new activities, more time.
More
More
time.
time. Yes,
Mhm.
ma'am. If you have collaborations with non-HBCU PIs in a grant, would that be a negative factor for successful funding? I think um, I think in this case it also would depend on the nature of the grant. We have some um, funding mechanisms where collaborations are encouraged. So I'm not sure. And it's all based on the technology, or what's the nature of the collaboration that you would be leveraging with these um, other institutions. And so yeah, I would just say it depends on the actual funding mechanism. But just in general, as I think about our solicitation, collaborations by and large are well received, provided that
Yes. Mhm.
um, it's well articulated and how there will be a mutual benefit, if you will, between both institutions.
And how it's managed.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
have to think this through
yeah.
because, and I'm thinking of one particular project, and Dr. McHale, if you don't mind, I'll use one of your projects. You know, she is a prolific writer, but
Yeah.
a prolific um, grants person. But she said I can call her Camille. All right, thank you, Dr. Camille. So Camille says Camille is in this project, right? It's what is our first broadening participation research center. I mean, off the chain project, but it involves institutions all across this country with different mechanisms of operation. So every institution has their own sponsored program office. Everybody has their own indirect costs. Everybody has their own, all the different things. Now imagine the difficulty that you have, of course, off the record, at your institution in managing your own award. And now you're bringing a bunch of different institutions that have different ways of doing things. When you come together and say, I'm collaborating, it can't just be a pretty word. It has to be a well thought out activity. So you've got to think of all the different nuances that one must navigate in order for your project to be successful. And you've got to articulate it in such a convincing way that when the reviewers see it, they say, man, they thought of everything. I mean, if I wanted to play devil's advocate, they got it. They already beat me to it. You've got to communicate to not just the program officers. We have what's called a gold standard of merit review amongst all agencies, federal agencies. We are the standard. And that's because we bring in peer institution, we bring in diverse institutions, let's say that, to review your ideas. And so we take their recommendations into account as we make our recommendations. And you know what I said, recommendations. I can't give you an award, nor can Carlita. So we make these recommendations based on how well you've convinced us. If you tell me about all your knowledge of some scientific phenomena, and it's a wonderful background, and you never tell me how you're going to execute, knowing, and you know, we know a little bit about your institution, and you never convince us, then you haven't convinced your reviewer either. And so that's where the challenges come into play. And so I ask of you, take this into consideration as you talk about your collaborations. It shouldn't be just a fancy word to throw out, even within the same institution. And I need to stop because I see I'm sucking up too much time. But even in our own institutions, I was on a project where I collaborated with another school within the same institution. And so, even though I brought forth what I thought, and seemingly from the reviewers, a convincing argument, when it came time to execute, there were so many things that I did not know or consider, and we had to work it out. And sometimes it caused things to slow down, and sometimes it caused us to be more careful, or provide a different approach to execute the end goal. These are things that we've got to think of. And so um, it's almost like, what's in my head is like, you remember those old school where you did cartoons and you would draw a picture, one picture, and you draw the same picture, but just one slight change, and the next. And then when you did a flip book, you see like a move. That's exactly what you're doing as you present your argument for why your project will work. Got to do it. And you kind of got to, you've got to convince us in words, written words. Okay, I'll stop.
Thank you. Um, I think I'm back in my place. Um, if you have two awards where the second award is a direct extension of the first and both are still active, do you need to submit separate reports? I think the answer is yes.
Yes,
All awards are distinct, each of which require their own reporting.
yes.
Please cover proposal status return without review. Should you withdraw the proposal?
If it's returned without review, it's already been, xed from us seeing it. So please, we invite all applicants to revise. Just take a moment to revise. And I've been there. You're gonna get in your feelings. You're gonna tell us, talk to your friends and your family, the dog, and say they don't know what they're doing over there at NSF. Yeah, I have my bad days, but if it's a return without review, take a moment, get mad, go out in the car and fuss a little bit, and then breathe and come back and say, is there any truth to some of the statements that were made? Because you will get a comment from us saying why this thing shows returned without review. Okay. And if that's not enough, again, you got our email. Reach out to us and we'll do our best to make sure that you're successful in your subsequent application. We want you to succeed.
Yeah. Related to the no cost extension, if you ask for the first extension and you want to apply for another grant, is the second one in jeopardy? Does it seem as if you haven't finished the work of the first one? So the second one would not be looked at favorably. Um, you know, just my shot at this is no. If the no cost extension has been granted, then you are still within the permissible time period to um, complete the report without any negative implications. That said, I think it's important that this might lend itself to the current and pending support. Um, the importance of including the current and pending support is part of that review analysis is to see how far extended one person is, like how many activities there are going on, and when you're talking about the time allocations to each of these projects, it's important that each of them deserve the time that's necessary to be successful on them. So
Mhm.
um, I
Yeah,
think that should be considered.
yeah. And it also depends on which directorate, division, program that you're applying to. So, those things. So, I mean, let's say you're going from MRI, and those are typically what, 1-2 years or something like that. Um, the attention that you give to that, and then being in a no cost extension or applying for something else, that's a different beast. So you an absolute answer, yes, what Carlita said, but you also have to be mindful of what you're applying for, as in your second grant.
Um, Sandra, as a new PI, typically there is a program officer that's assigned specifically to your award, where if you look up your award, you should see their name associated. But I can assure you, if you were to email myself and or Michelle, we would direct you to the appropriate person to have you discuss the nature of your issue. So any one of us in the HBCU-UP program, again, that's myself, Michelle, and then Emmanuel will be able to assist any person, any PI. I know we've talked about the annual report already, just reemphasizing the format is already embedded in research.gov. So, and no, there's no page limit. There's just, well, there's a word limit, not a page limit. So in each of the boxes on that electronic page, you'll be given a space to capture a status, if you will, of your current project.
May I say something quickly about reports? One of the things that I wish I did better with my awards, and it's an opportunity for you to learn from what I could have done, is be very intentional about documenting or keeping anything that pertains to your award. Okay. So if you already have it in, for instance, an electronic space, every time your student, let's say you set the spreadsheet up or something, and I know you guys are going to be better at this than me, because I mean, I still write everything on paper. But every time a student goes out to present their work, if you collect that abstract and that book, or, the electronic information about that, and keep it in one place, you can use it over and over again. One, for your annual report, or two, for your institutional's annual report, or your reporting, your profile, your tenure and promotion packet. I mean, but keep it in a place, so when you write your annual report, you have a table already that's a working document. And so you can say, I've supported 5 students in year 1 to give a presentation on our research at technical, regional or national meetings. You can do that. Every time you support a workshop, or you bring in a speaker or something else, write it down. Every time you're invited to give a talk about your meeting or your work, even on your campus, write it down. And so if you have that and date it, and you have that over a period of time, by the time it's annual report time, you are not in that group that says, can I have an extension? You see what I'm saying? So you're working at it the whole time. So just keep that in mind. That'll help annual reporting a little bit, be a little easier.
Yeah. And I think how many review panelists normal are there for the HBCU program applications, and how often is the turnover? Is there opportunity for new ones to join? So the short answer is yes. We're always looking for persons to serve on our panels. That's one thing that I've been doing a lot of lately is identifying persons who could potentially serve on panels. I will say from personal experience, that was, one of the ways that I learned the most, probably about just the proposal process, the review process, how to position myself to be able to craft a proposal that might be deemed worthy and recommended for funding. So for anyone who has gone through a couple rounds of proposals and may have taken some time to get funding. Another way, in my opinion, to kind of increase and grow quicker on that learning curve is sometimes to serve as a reviewer. I thought it was very beneficial from a personal um, experience. That said, I think there's also another question about kind of just the review process. Just in general, I can't remember right now where I saw it. It was kind of about, oh yeah, the question of any timeline on the proposal that was submitted in the last submission cycle. So for our solicitation, most of the tracks are due, or all of the tracks are due in the fall. It's either a deadline of about September or a deadline of October for our particular solicitation. And in that process, and this gold standard of review that Michelle was referencing, there is a window of 6 months by which all proposals need to be not only received, but gone through the panel, analyzed for potential recommendations before decisions are rendered. And so that cycle occurs from submission to awarding can occur within that 6-month window. And so for HBCU-UP in particular, like I said, our tracks are annual in terms of their submission. Please note that for those that require the letter of intent is due a little bit earlier. So when I said September and October, those were the final due dates. So please heed the solicitation that identify the earlier dates for when a letter of intent or for some of our larger awards, particularly the broadening participation research centers, they might require a proposal that's due a little bit earlier as well. So please review the solicitation for the explicit dates therein. But the final due date for our program tracks are in the fall, and it's typically that 6-month window to go through the review process.
And the centers are the only ones that are not annual. That's
Yeah,
like
that's
every,
true. That's
I
true.
think 3 years or something like that. But pay attention to those due dates because the preliminary proposal is, is before then, and it's a little bit more intensive than a letter of intent.
Yeah. I think that we've addressed most of the questions, and just due to time, this may be a good opportunity to pivot to that last kind of open discussion opportunity, and that's to hear more from our PI community about the future of HBCU-UP and how we might consider your perspectives of things that might be needed in the community that we might be able to consider as we think about our future. So I just start with this first comment that I think is coming in to kind of address that about programs to be focused on new educational research programs, specifically about addressing observed educational gaps. Right now, I think that we have funding mechanisms that would be appropriate for those types of interventions that would support student achievement, student success, things like that. I guess I would be wondering, beyond what we currently do in the current funding mechanisms, where might we be able to at least consider how to grow and make sure we're meeting the needs of the PI community?
With regard to filling educational gaps, sometimes, and this is just from observation and I would dare say experience, we have ideas about things that might be successful, right? Maybe we've tried it and it's been successful, or maybe we haven't. Let me encourage you to make sure that you ground your ideas in the literature. What does that mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else had to do it and it worked for them and therefore it's going to work for us. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that make sure that you demonstrate um, some knowledge of what is out there in the STEM education literature with regard to whatever gap you're trying to address, and then propose what you are attempting to do to mitigate whatever situation you're trying to mitigate. Our colleagues in DUE, very prolific in that. We have friends in what am I thinking of? DRL, ECR, other divisions and programs that are very focused on STEM education and addressing gaps. But just because, and I have to say this not because so much of your question, but because of my own experience, just because I have a good idea doesn't mean that it's going to be well received when sending it to a set of experts in the field of STEM education. They know the models that are out there, and they will bring in reviewers that will say, well, why didn't you cite this person and that person, because they're doing something similar. May not be the same, but you got to play in that pool all the way if you're going to do it.
I saw question or question from Camille in that case about the ACE implementation. So, for context, for institutions who apply for implementation awards, they're typically can reapply for additional funding through that track. Up to 3 times with an option for the fourth. And the fourth is typically the ACE implementation level, where after that, as was indicated in the question, that they're no longer eligible, right? So that's kind of the last round, if you will, for funding through the HBCU-UP program in the context of implementation awards. And the observation is that the student support is the part that is difficult to sustain beyond the life of the grant. And the question is there any recommendations on how the program might continue to support those institutions once the ACE award has expired? I think it's a interesting situation for me to observe, because as I've come in, I've started to study those institutions who have been, and there's probably about 7 institutions, Camille, that might fall into this category where they've achieved, they're now in this 4th round or starting to apply for that 4th round. And this is a common concern among those institutions, at least right now. There's no additional mechanism for funding. But the type of one other caveat about this particular track is after the for the 2nd round, so beyond the 1st round of application, all of those proposals are also supposed to have a research component where they're generating knowledge about how the said interventions are informing the work. And I just wonder if, Michelle, what your thoughts are on leveraging that knowledge generation to potentially speak to the broadening participation, and maybe even kind of center level for that type of work. Not sure. It's a good thought. I mean, good question.
Yeah, and it's a question that I have wrestled with even from a PI's perspective, right? Because you want to maintain the support, yes, for your students, but then the argument is, oh, there are all these other programs, just apply for an STEM or something like that. I don't know. And I would be very honest, this is a very interesting time for the entire nation, but especially for the HBCU community. Um, I mean, all of a sudden it's popular to be an HBCU. Before, 4 years ago, I remember being at a conference, a very notable conference, and people said, "What is that?" So um, so the responses to those questions about how do we sustain our recipients in that community, I in my gut, I suspect is changing and may give us so much more attention that we will have definitive answers. At this stage, I don't know, because we're in a similar situation as you are. And I'll say this, we are doing an extraordinary amount with the resources that we've been given. And so, and I have to be very careful about what I say beyond that point. But I do say this, that at any opportunity to do more, we definitely are going to take advantage of it. But I do thank you, Camille, for prodding us, because if we're going to be optimistic, then we have to be ready for when that extra, like my father-in-law would say, that big lick comes. So that, shout out to Mr. They call him Clayville in Shreveport. Shout out to Clayville in Shreveport, for when that big lick comes, so that we can help more, we can do more, we can um, address those things that you're saying.
I will offer this thought as well, just for all of the PIs who are working of this in this space of student support. Um, one of the conversations that we'll have tomorrow is about dissemination, and I think that it strengthens our position to be able to engage in said conversations. The more we hear from PIs about what you're learning in that space and what those explicit needs may be, it just may help frame the conversation a bit more, to be able to have impactful conversations on the other side.
You just rang my bell. You just rang my bell.
Yeah.
And I want to say this to you, the audience, about the power of dissemination. Okay. We have, there are those who, uh, you know, say, I'm teaching too much. When would I have time to do research, let alone write something up? I get it, been there. I remember in Louisiana, the year Katrina, we had so many students. I ended up teaching 7 or 8 classes while doing a whole bunch of other stuff, and so trying to get grants out and all that. So I get it. I've been in your shoes. I understand it. However, by now you realize I'm about the cause. The cause is so great that there are sacrifices that I made. I'm not telling you to make them, that made me push beyond my quote normal, um, my normal limitations, right? So dissemination is so key. I will let you in on this little tidbit, kind of playing with lines that I know I'm hoping Carlita is not cringing about. Um, I saw something very recently that confirmed the things that you've heard from I call her, the mother of HBCU, Claudia Rankins, or godmother, whichever one you prefer, about the intentionality that we must have about dissemination. And in it basically said that our institutions still are not disseminating enough. I'm not sure what that means formally with regard to um, how the rest of fill in the blank looks at us. But I am certain that that the more we disseminate, the stronger our footing. So you say, okay, that's nice to say, Michelle. So what do I do? Understand that you have an opportunity, and please take this message home, to publish any work that you do, whether it's in the bench or in your classroom. Boyer, I remember some years ago, I was at an AAC&U meeting and I first heard about Boyer and his modes of scholarship, levels of scholarship, types of scholarship, and I forgot the categorization. And when I learned about all the different ways you can define scholarship, I realized that we had been missing an opportunity to publish what we do. If you have to teach 5 classes of Bio 101, you have so many data points for some activity that you're doing in your class that you have plenty to do research without asking for a dollar. And so you can publish that and use those publications to build your credibility in whatever field, right? And then as you build that, you have preliminary data to put out for other applications. So we're going to talk about this some more tomorrow during our networking session about how we can disseminate more. Um, so, use what you have. I'm Jamaican. Camille knows what I'm talking about. Well, I'm a naturalized American citizen, just in case you're wondering, oh, what is she doing here? Okay. We have this saying, liquor, liquor, make much, much. In other words, take the little bit that you have and work that mug, work it so that it can be as grand as we know it to be. We have done so much with so little, and it has been coveted, even a little bit that we use. I use the example all the time about Willie Mays in New Orleans. The lines wrap around and wrap around. It's on Travel Channel. Everybody's going to Willie Mays to get her famous food, and understand that the food that Willie Mae cooks, other than the fried chicken, is stuff that we developed. And when I say we, people who are African Americans, Blacks, slaves, that were rejects, the food that was rejected by other people, and we turned it into a delicacy. We've been doing that with the people that we learned about from Cassandra. We've been doing that with our institutions. We can do that in our classrooms. So I see another Jamaican there, naturalized too. Okay, I am saying to you that do not despise small beginnings. Let me say it like that. Take what you have, work it, disseminate it. There are venues that will accept our publications. And so what if it's not in this high impact place? We can make our own impact as HBCU-UP PIs and educators. Work what you have, and so that we can squash this argument that we don't disseminate enough. We have plenty to say. And because we're not saying it, other people are writing our narratives. I'm sorry, I'll come off the soapbox. It's time.
Yeah, we're always a kindred spirit on that regard.
Yeah.
I think it's important to also mention too that um, to that point, now that HBCUs have found their ways resurging again in terms of this national interest,
Mm-hmm.
everyone also wants to know how we've done what we've done for all of this time. So the other part of this conversation is, what you offer is your lived experience,
Hey.
and that's just enough, right? That's more than enough at times. No one, unless you're in the family, so to speak, they don't know what we're doing.
Right. Right.
And frankly, it's hard to replicate. So even if we do share, we found that we've had times in which, you know, other institutions have made space where they've been able to recruit more students to attend other places. And is most it's mostly financial incentives, right? We are clear that HBCUs in particular do so well with the retaining and the preparation of our STEM students because of the community that we provide. Everyone knows this, probably, that's on this call. We all know this. The question is, how do we also share how we're doing it in a way that even while sharing that persons are trying to replicate it. And we know that it's hard to do, even if we say this is exactly what I do, because there's some parts of us that just sometimes can't be described. But we can offer certainly what that experience is.
And I'm gonna dare say we got to value what we have, because
Yes.
if we keep thinking that what they have over there is better than us, man,
Yes.
you never truly understand. I remember thinking about, I had to go to X restaurant because, oh, they talk about and it looks so fancy, and you go there and he's like, I paid $50 for what? And then you go home, and then to home, and you get home cooking and you realize, oh my gosh. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I keep talking about food. We're not supposed to do that. This is COVID.
Yeah.
Bottom, I'm using that as an analogy though. If we don't understand our own value, it'll be easy for someone to take it from us.
Yeah.
So it's time to stop and look, evaluate, and then work it. Somebody asked, where can we publish this information? There are so many venues that we can talk about. I know Ivory Tolson has a platform. STEM Central has a platform
Mhm.
that's growing.
Essential,
There,
certainly.
oh my gosh. You can, I know, I'm getting ready to serve on this broadening participation panel for American Chemical Society, and they're inviting you guys to publish about your activities, the results of your project. And I'll find it and try to make sure it's disseminated to you, because there are invitations coming. I've been trying to tweet today, and everybody knows I don't tweet. But I'm going to do my best to send the information to you. Castle, somebody said Castle, Castle.
Yes. Yeah.
You better find Castle. I'm telling you. Look, make your space. Make
Yes.
your space. I have a family member that I love dearly. I'll let you read between the lines, that is using YouTube. Why does it have to be in this written form? If you have a following, and we can create our own. We don't have to have cloth that looks like somebody else's. We have our own unique style of making fabric. And just if we value it enough, hey, just maybe it'll become attractive to somebody else who used to say that
Mhm.
stuff wasn't valuable, and they knew in their heart it was. But if we don't believe it, it's not going to happen. Melanie just put it out there, so there it is. Pubsacs.org, ChemEd, right?
Yeah.
That's the opportunity, and then the webinar is coming up. But let me stop. Go on, Carlita, take your meeting.
Well, this again, this the good part is this is the part where we're wanting to hear from
Mhm.
um, our community, our PIs, and so uh, we are. Our position is that we just want to make sure that HBCU-UP continues to meet the needs of this community and those
Right.
who um, have yet to join our community, right? And so we remain open um, to understanding what your experience is. And before I transition too much, I want to go back to that last point. Um, Speaking of council, I think it's important for all of the PIs who may be in administrative roles. That's another space that you can talk about that we really aren't talking about, right? And so I
Yes.
think I didn't want to miss the moment of saying part of explaining how we're positioned at HBCUs to deliver is very nuanced. Yes, it's in the classroom. Yes, it's in our own research programs and in discipline specific research, STEM education research, but there is this leadership and this administrative piece that is certainly also an opportunity to um, really be mindful of and consider what the implications of the administration and leadership is. It may also speak to, in some part, to that sustainability conversation that we were talking about at some time. So um, and then in the event that we have some sponsored programs persons that have decided to join us today, I think it's equally important that collectively our institutions can grow in that space as well. How do our sponsored programs and administration identify um, the the investments that's necessary to build that part of our research infrastructure and enterprise at the same time? So um, it's huge in terms of the lens and how, yes, we do have some sponsor programs person. Here I am, I like it. Um, that too is an area where sharing what we've learned in all of those various components, I think is very important to this space and how we continue to grow and build capacity at our institutions. Um, I was just going through. Michelle, that was one question that maybe in the last session that maybe we can get to. Maybe there are some more
Sure.
comments that may come through, and it was about postdocs for RIAs.
Mhm.
Um, I thought maybe we could speak to that.
Okay. Yeah, you can put funds in for a postdoc. It's not, it's not an issue, but you've got to remember how much money you have.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the other thing that a lot of PIs fuss about, and I've had to squash a few arguments at my institution, when the funds say you have 300,000 or 400,000, you got to remember the university has its indirect cost. Okay. There's some money that goes straight to the university. Know how much that money is up front. You got to know what it is because that is a part of your total award. So, really, when you're getting a $400,000 award, some institutions will have as much as 50% indirect cost on all activity except um, for items where that have been declared as items that you cannot charge indirect costs on. And you'll hear them say these are non IDC items, indirect costs, non IDC. What are those items? Equipment and anything to do with participant support or students, typically there is no indirect cost. So it's like winning the lottery. You might win $1 million, but by the time you get taxed, you might have 500,000. Hopefully, it's not that bad. So you got to think about all that part. And so when you get an RIA and you have to pay your postdoc for a 2-year period of time, then make sure that you budget for the rest of the project so that it can be successful. Okay. So I see Camille has a comment. She says it's helpful to have a postdoc that looks like your student. Make sure that person can be a role model because chances are that's the person that your student will see in, for example, if it's your laboratory or, day-to-day interactions, depending on how engaged you will actively be in the project. So yeah, just, as you plan the different components and costs, make sure that you have enough money to accomplish what you need to do. And don't forget, you also can request release time. You also can request release time and summer salary. And there are not too many projects that allow both. You have to pick one or the other. RIA will allow you to do both. So don't, I guess I can tell I'm running out of words. So don't sleep on that. So we go from there.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes before this session is scheduled to end. Um, I guess now is a good opportunity to open the floor. If there's, we've provided a number of updates to the community. We've also, had some conversation to address some of your concerns. Are there any questions that we can address? And again, any recommendations for our consideration, we are open to receiving them as well. And as they start to come in, I thought I'd just take a time to remind you that tomorrow is day 2. And we are certainly excited that we have another day dedicated to our PI community. And so just to remind you, tomorrow we start at noon. Specifically where, again, we'll do another series of breakout sessions. So, if you have some of the questions that we had today were specifically about the financial processes. And so there might be questions that you may have for our Division of Grants and Agreements. They will be giving a presentation tomorrow, mostly discussing kind of budget management and that funding process from their lens. They are technically the office that grants the award. So that's certainly an important persons to hear from on tomorrow. As we previously mentioned, we'll have the new PI session. We'll be a smaller group where we can start to address some of the questions of the new members of our PI community. And it'll also be an opportunity to continue to engage with the video presentations, which is also scheduled to follow this session as well. So we want to invite you to certainly continue to hear from your community of scholars, if you will. Usually we would be in a large auditorium walking around with some refreshments while hearing from our colleagues. This time we get to do it from a personal space, but please visit and join the video session. And some of those PIs will be available live to answer some questions, so make sure you view those links. And then tomorrow afternoon, we'll do another kind of networking breakout session, but more broadly. So we'll be all together. There'll be, CREST and HBCU-UP PIs will be kind of all together. We'll continue this conversation again around dissemination, around how do we respond in COVID. And then the third is, what is it? Oh, it just escaped me.
Oh, for tomorrow's session?
Oh, and additional funding opportunities,
right,
beyond the current programs where we found success. So again, we are excited to be before you. I'm going to check the chat to see if there's any other comments coming in. Thank you, Iris, for reiterating, highlighting the PI presentations that was going up. It seems like a email notification has gone out, so check your emails. Also the website for any updates and more information on how to access those presentations.
I have a challenge for you. Why don't you all come back at 4:45, bring a glass of orange juice and some crackers and cheese. If you're so inclined, drink a little something and eat a little something, and let's just let's support each other, because this is also a dissemination opportunity that I hope that you do not frown on or sleep on. And so let's just make sure that we make the best of it, rather than let COVID make the best of us. Thank you so much.
Yes. All right. Well, if there are no more questions or comments, we want to thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for engaging with us, making this. We weren't sure how this was going to play out. Michelle and I wanted this to feel as relaxed as possible, but also maintaining the sacred space that is this conference. And so hopefully, to the extent that we could do it virtually, we've been able to offer that to you. We know that we may not have gotten to every single question, but we want to make sure that you feel comfortable in reaching out to us. We are certainly available to engage however may be necessary. And again, we'll be around tomorrow and to continue that dialogue. So again, thank you. We appreciate you, and we definitely appreciate all that you've done within the pandemic, right? So this has affected everyone. And I certainly know that on your colleges and universities, there might be a significant amount of uncertainty. Things have changed, things have shifted. Personally, you may have been impacted as well. Our thoughts and prayers go out to you. And until tomorrow, Michelle.
See you later, or hopefully see you later. And definitely, I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Take care. Thanks, Carlita. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody, for sticking around.
Yes, thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thank you, Iris and Jay and everybody.
Yes, yes. Avex, thank you.
Yeah, 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 yeah. All right. See you soon.